Hey guys, welcome to another episode of NetSec Now. Today we are going to discuss the recon stage of the four phases of network security auditing and penetration testing. So, let's read the disclaimer. Any information disclosed in this series is provided for the sole purpose of learning network security. We take no responsibility for any misuse of any information we provide. We only suggest you audit systems that you have permission on or otherwise in your virtual lab. Moving forward. So we discussed the phases of penetration testing, right? There's an internal audit and an external audit. Well, in the last video, we went over the information gathering stage, doing your homework. And we used quite a few examples of just how much information people put out online, which is insane, if you ask me, in today's day and age. Well, today we're going to get into the recon stage, and we are going to build a case against a said client. Now, today we're going to be using our lab as an internal audit. We're going to be emulating an internal audit, and it's really just simpler to understand how some of the tools work and how to read results and things like that. So let's move forward. So the types of audits, we know there's an external outside of the local area network audit. That's a WAN-to-WAN audit. There's an internal audit, of course, that means inside of the local area network. Sometimes you would do this for PCI compliancy and stuff like that. Then, of course, vulnerability assessment, penetration testing, and security policy auditing. Well, today we're going to go over, like I said, the internal audit of it, just to get you guys familiar with some of the tools and how to use them, how to read results, and how to put the case together for your customer. Okay, so recon, staying quiet, ninja mode, engage. Well, of course, anytime we're doing a penetration test, we always want to stay as quiet as possible, right? Even when we're doing internal audits, they know we're there. I mean, we're physically sitting inside their building, right? So you still want to stay quiet. You don't want to try to disrupt the network traffic. You don't want to, fire off things that are going to really disrupt their business. And most of the time you're doing internal audits when they're actually there. We would want to try to do external audits when they're not there, just in case, so there's no service interruption. So of course we're going to do some port scanning and enumeration. And basically we're going to enumerate the hosts that are on the network, check their ports, see what's open, see what's not. We're going to just basically do service discovery and identification based upon those ports and what's running on them. And Nmap we're going to be using as well. We're going to skip the social engineering phase 1 because that's really for the external audit, as we showed in the information gathering stage of phases of network security auditing. So that's not really going to apply today, but vulnerability scanning, we'll use OpenVAS, of course. Verification, logic, check, and check again. Guys, I can't drive that home enough. Use logic. It is very important. So then we're going to put it all together and build a case. So recon, tools of the trade, logical thinking, of course, and guys, I'll keep driving that home. Planning is key. You need to have a good plan in order to do a successful audit. So for port scanning, we're going to be using Nmap primarily. HPing 3 we'll get into in the advanced series for doing like firewall, IDS, IPS evasion techniques. Netcat, we'll do a brief overview of it, but really Nmap are going to be our go-to guy for port scanning and service discovery. So of course, vulnerability scanners, there's a different few of them. OpenVAS, of course, we spoke about in some instances. There is Nessus, of course. We won't be using that because I'm not really a big fan of the way Nessus went with their paid version versus their community version. We'll touch a little bit on Metasploit and Armitage today. We're not going to get into web scanners, obviously. That's more of an external type of audit. We're going to be using Telnet banner grabbing for verification of services that we find. And of course, RFC port checking, really all that means is checking it out online. What port is port, 8080 used for? We might touch on that just a little bit. And case file software, guys, you could use Notepad. You can use Casefile, which is included in Kali Linux, but I'm not really a big fan of that. In fact, what I would recommend you doing is installing OpenOffice. And if you need help with that, just post on our forums, and I'll go ahead and respond to you. Actually, I might just make a topic on the forums regarding that, because OpenOffice is really great. That's what I use to make these slideshows and presentations and build reports and stuff like that. It's like Office for Windows, but it's free. So anyway, moving forward, let's get out of here and fire up our Kali Linux box, which we conveniently already have going. So the first things first, if you're doing an internal audit and you're on a customer's network, you're either hardwired in and plugged into a switch somewhere, or you're part of their wireless network. Okay. one thing to be aware of is some of the larger organizations may have VLANs or virtual LAN segments in place with a managed switch. So you have to know about that before you start your internal audit, okay? So the first things first, we want to check our IP address to see where we're at on a network. Now, this is just going to be emulating, obviously, a small network, but this would apply to most networks. Okay, so just open up a terminal and find out what your IP address is. It's IFCONFIG. Okay, so we know we're hardwired here on ETH-O. Okay, and then our IP address is 192.168.1.2. Okay, so let's just clear out the screen here. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to find out how many hosts or IP addresses are on this subnet. How many hosts are actually alive? So we don't want to spend time putting, a whole crazy range of IP addresses into Nmap and waiting. If they had like a Class B subnet, we could be there for hours just waiting for results to, come through. So we really want to find just the alive host. That's the ones we're going to be, pursuing after, and that's the ones that we're really going to be checking out. Okay, so there's a neat little tool included in Kali Linux that allows you to use, or basically kind of exploit the NetBIOS name service, right, to show you what's going on. And just to give you a brief overview so you know what we're talking about here, what our virtual lab network actually looks like, let's go over to our Proxmox machine. And you can see here we have a Windows XP Pro Service Pack 3 machine running here. Okay, that one actually did some automatic updates on accident. I forgot to turn that off. So that's okay. It actually works out better in our favor because there's going to be some times where you're on a network, you're doing an internal audit against, the Windows machines that are on the network, and most of them might be patched and updated, so they may not be vulnerable, but more than likely you're going to find at least one that was skipped over, not paid attention to, the updates failed for whatever reason, whatever, and you might just find yourself a vulnerable host. Okay, and that's what our job is to do. It's not to make sure that we find one every single time. It's just to make sure that we find ones that are vulnerable, and if there aren't any ones that are vulnerable, give them the thumbs up, give them a good report, you're good to go, have a nice day. But if you do find ones that are vulnerable, hey, look, machine on this IP address with NetBIOS name, whatever, is vulnerable, take care of it, okay? So we have a Metasploitable box, but that's not started up, of course. We have a Windows Server 2003 Standard Edition domain controller, which is doing Active Directory and DNS. It's not doing DHCP or anything crazy. We'll let the router handle that for simplicity's sake. But that's you'll still find those in most organizations these days, even though we're up against Windows Server 2008 these days, and the logistics of it, the background of it is all the same. It's Active Directory, right? So there's no big crazy changes. Okay, so this will apply to most anything. And then we have the next here in line, we have a Windows 7 Ultimate box, which is really a Windows 7 Professional box. Now, when you go into networks, you may find a lot of the times there's mixed networks. They have some Windows 7 hosts, they have some Windows XP hosts, they have some, hosts that are like Windows 98. And the reason being is because they, if they're a manufacturing company specifically, those guys usually have, proprietary software that was created for Windows 98, and it only runs on Windows 98, and it cannot be emulated any other way. So you may find a Windows 98 box that's either physical or up in a VM somewhere, hiding on the network, okay? So be prepared for that. You may find some old stuff out there. Okay, so and then also in our information gathering, tutorial we did, again, look at what type of business they're in. If they're a manufacturing company, look what types of software manufacturing companies use. For instance, if they're manufacturing a special kind of widget, you would do a Google search for, manufacturing that type of widget software, and you'll see maybe there's only a handful of companies, and a good majority of them are still, the system requirements are Windows 98 and Windows 95. May not be for XP, right? So again, that's why it's important to do your homework. Okay, so anyway, moving forward. So we have those three machines out on the network here. Let's go back to our Kali Linux box. We already found out our IP address. Now, building a case starts from the very gate. As soon as you're in the network and you're ready to begin your pen test or your security audit, you need to have stuff in order. You need to organize things, right? So a simple way to do that is just to make a directory and name it after that client, right? So we're just going to issue the make directory command, mkdir, and we're going to call this Acme Inc., right? So we'll just make it here in the root directory. Okay. So you can see we have the directory now, Acme Inc., right? So let's go ahead and cd into there, because that's going to be our working directory for the most part. Okay, now let's clear out the screen so we're not confused. Okay, moving forward. So again, I mentioned this really cool tool that Kali Linux has in it. It's called NBT scan, and what that does is basically exploit, the NetBIOS name service and sharing and stuff that Windows likes to use on their network to share files amongst themselves, so on and so forth. Well, this tool will actually scan and check all of the live hosts. It'll give you their NetBIOS name. It'll give you whether they're a server or not, and it will also give you their MAC address. So the command is NBT scan, and you could always use the autocomplete tab key to issue any command that you know is there. Save yourself a little bit of time. So let's just hit enter and take a look at some of their options they have in here. You can see there's a lot, right? So scrolling all up to the top here, you have Verboros, and whenever an application gives you an option to use Verboros, you want to see what's going on. You want as much detail and information as possible, right? So you always use a V for Verboros. In this case, we're not going to do it. I mean, it's kind of neither here nor there since it's such a small lab that we're working on here, right? So then you got the TAC-D options for dump packets, print whole packet contents. We don't really need any of that unless you're doing debugging. You can set your bandwidth throttling and stuff like that. You don't really need that. You can set timeout values for milliseconds for response on a timeout. What we're really going to be focused on here is the -R switch, or the TAC-R switch. But if you read the description here, it says use local port 137 for scans, Win95 boxes respond to this only. That's not exactly true. And the reason being is because Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows Server 2003, Windows Server 2008, anything that uses NetBIOS will respond to this. So maybe this was written a long time ago and maybe they made a mistake, who knows. But in my testing, I know that that actually works, right? So you can see some examples down here towards the bottom, and this is the example we're going to be using here, scans whole Class C subnet, or Class C network in this case. Okay, so if you had like a Class B or something like that, obviously it's gonna go against that, whatever IP address you put in. Now, if you look at the next one under here, if you knew, say for instance, there was only 100 IPs being used out of the Class C or Class B subnet, and it started at 192.168.2 to .101 or something like that. Well, obviously you don't want to scan all 255 available address spaces, so you can specify just a range, a small range if you wanted to. Well, I know we only have 3 live hosts on this lab network here for this exercise, so I'm just going to do the NBT-R scan, okay? And then, of course, if you want to read up more on this stuff, by all means, feel free to do it on your time. We're not going to go through all this because this really means nothing to us. We're looking at the NBT-R, okay? So, clear the screen out here. So it's NBT scan -R, right, lowercase r, and then 192.168.1.0. That's our starting range, and we want to go all the way up to .255. So we're going to do /24 for the CIDR, right? So it's short instead of typing out TAC 255. Okay. Now I want to start getting you guys used to piping things out to a text file. So it's either easily greppable later if you want to search through that file and pick out certain things, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit. But it's also just to have everything organized in one file, right? And then later on we'll break it apart and we'll maybe use a template. Maybe I'll create a template for you guys and upload it to the website you can download to use for your pen test, so you know what you're putting in your port scan results here and exploits results here and so on and so forth, right? So for now, just for this exercise, we're just going to build a basic text file. So anytime you want to pipe something out to a text file for the very first time, you're going to use the 1 greater than less than symbol, okay? And then the file that you want to create. So we're just going to name this results.txt, okay? So if you wanted to append, and we're going to show you that in the next command using nmap, if you want to append to the end of a current existing file, you have to use 2 greater than less than symbols, and we'll show you that here in just a minute. So let's fire off this command here, and in just a moment here it should have outputted to a results.txt file. Okay, good. So let's just make sure that file exists, and let's go ahead and cat out that file, and you can see. So let's take a look at some of these results and read what they mean. Okay, so you have your meanings up here for your rows. So it's IP address, NetBIOS name, server, user, MAC address. Okay. So going through here, 192.168.1.2, well, that was our IP address as we learned in ifconfig in the very first start of this whole thing. So we know that that's not going to give us a NetBIOS name because we're not doing any NetBIOS on Kali Linux, right? And so we don't have to pay attention to that. The next one down here, 192.168.1.3, desktop 1, says it's a server. And it will only say that usually because it has some sort of file sharing enabled, NetBIOS, something like that. And it says user unknown because it couldn't guess a user. And then it has the MAC address. Well, this machine in particular, desktop 1, I know is the machine that we're actually using to do this demonstration off of, and that's the machine that hosts our Kali Linux VM. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about that one. What I'm looking for here is these 3 IP addresses. Of course, again, according to our Proxmox virtual machine server that we have for the lab, you know that these are the 3 boxes that are running on there, right? There's a domain controller, then there's a Windows 7 box and a Windows XP box. Okay, so let's take a look at the results here. 192.168.1.9 Acme Inc. PDC. Well, gee, I wonder what that could be, right? So it says it's a server type, and it's giving us a MAC address. Now, the MAC address is important to have in case we needed to do some sort of ARP spoofing or some sort of MAC spoofing, something like that. I mean, we may want to have that for later on. Okay, so moving down the list here, 192.168.1.8 is an XP Pro 01, as we saw in our Proxmox box. Of course, you wouldn't see that if you were doing this live, but we can tell that that's an XP box server, because of course it has NetBIOS enabled, and then the MAC address here, and then we look at the next one here, 192.168.1.7, and it says jadams-pc. Well, in organizations, that's more than likely what you're going to find, because that's what admins like to name their boxes. You'll get the idea. So it says server type, of course, user unknown, and again, here's a MAC address, something that's definitely important for us to have. So now you can see when we catted out the results.txt file, we have this information in it. Well, okay, so we know that the 3 IP addresses that we're after here is .7 through .9, right? So now we need to find out what open ports are available on these hosts. Well, we know that something's got to be up with NetBIOS. NetBIOS has got to be enabled, but we want to double check, right? So we want to run a port scan against these 3 boxes, and we're going to use Nmap to do that. So let me clear out this screen. Okay, so Nmap is a very intuitive, very powerful port scanning application. Not only does it just scan ports, but it has so many different options to it. In fact, there's books written specifically on Nmap. I mean, it's crazy. We will get into advanced Nmap techniques in the advanced series for firewall IDS IPS evasion techniques from the outside, an external audit or a WAN-to-WAN audit, right? So for this demonstration here, we don't really need to specify too many crazy switches that you could use inside of Nmap. I mean, just if you did Nmap and hit enter to look at the all the options, I mean, you can see that there's hundreds of options that you can input in here, different flags, so on and so forth. I mean, this is really an advanced tool to use. But for time's sake here and for ease of learning, we're just going to issue a 1 flag. Okay, so the thing with Nmap is that you can enter in an IP address range, much like as we did in NBT scan, or you can issue in certain IP addresses, right? So if you know there's only 3 IPs on the whole entire network, you're not going to want to scan all the empty ones that aren't, alive, right? So the command goes as such: nmap dash or tac capital A. That's for the host discovery, right? If you notice up in here, there was a different option for host discovery as well, but I use tac capital A. I'm not going to fish through all this stuff here, but Nmap, you can spoof IP addresses. I mean, it's intense, and we'll get on. We're actually probably just going to do a separate tutorial just on Nmap itself because it's so intense. Okay, so Nmap space tac capital A for host discovery. Okay, now we're going to enter in our IP address. So we want, if we remember, we want to do .7 through .9, right? Because there was only 3 live hosts that we found with the NBT scan. So we're going to do 192.168.1.7. We're going to start out with 7, and then it's tac, and you don't have to put a dot in here. You just have to put the last octet of the IP. So 7 through .9. So it's going to scan 192.168.1.7, .8, and .9. Okay. So now you do a space, and if you want to specify only certain ports or all ports to scan, by default Nmap scans all the first 1024 ports, okay? But to specify ports, you do the tac lowercase p, and then if you only want to go after certain ports like 139, 445, so on and so forth, port 80, you would do that here, and you separate them with commas. So 139, 445, 80, and they don't have to be in numerical order. That's the great thing. Okay, so you can do that if you wanted to, and you can specify as many in here as you want. Just for this sake, I'm going to do, if you want to specify as a port range like 1 through 80, you could do that by 1 tac 80. Okay, but we're just going to do 1 tac 1024. Even though that's the default, I just like to type it in anyway, just so I know for sure that it's being scanned. Okay. The great thing about Nmap is it does have the ability to export your results to an XML file. And what's good about that is there is a tool built into Kali that comes with Kali that you can convert that XML file into an actual readable HTML file. And since Kali Linux has Apache Web Server installed, all you'd have to do is start that, run this command, convert it. We're not actually going to go through that now. We're actually just going to append this to our results.txt file that we were working on, right? Because we want everything in one file so we can pick it apart later on. Okay, so we're going to do again the double greater than less than symbols because we're appending to the file, right? So if we're just creating the file right off the beginning, like we said, you would just do one of the greater than less than signs. Okay, so we want to do that to results.txt. Okay, and it's always a good idea in Nmap to use Verberos as well. So we can just put that before our A, so it's tac lowercase v for Verberos. Okay, you can also issue a command inside here, a flag that will update the stats every 10 seconds, 20 seconds, whatever you want to do, but we're not actually going to do that because we're only scanning 3 IP addresses, so it shouldn't take all that long. Okay, so let's just go ahead and hit enter. Now you're not going to see any output coming to the screen because it's all going into the results.txt file, right? So it's appending it to the end of the NBT scan results that were put in there initially. And again, it's very important to know, because I know you guys are going to ask me this question, you have to use the double greater than less than symbols to append to the end of a file. Only use one when you want to begin a new file, right? So let's just give it a few seconds here to complete. Keep in mind it is doing 1 through 1024 ports on each of the 3 hosts, so it may take a minute or two. Again, if you're doing this over a WAN, it may take even longer, especially if you're doing it through proxies, and we'll get into how to do that as well. It's going to take even longer, right? So the whole key to this game is to be patient, very patient. Don't get frustrated. Don't be like, hey, it's not working right away, I give up. Stick with it. It takes a little while. And if you want to get good results, you'll wait around for it, right? So patience is key here. Okay, so we see that the scan's completed, right? So now let's just take a look at our results file again. So cat results.txt. Well, hey, look at that. Here's some Nmap results here. And let's scroll all the way back up to the top so you can see that it actually appended. So now if you look here from this line down, so it's the first thing that we put into here was the NBT scan results, right? So then we spaced it and appended starting Nmap. Oops. And now you can go through this whole entire scan and look at it. So we can go ahead and see, and it's kind of hard to read it this way, so sometimes you may want to actually export this to an HTML so you can read it easier, and perhaps I'll show you how to do that here in just a second. So it says doing an ARP ping scan, okay, and then scanning 3 hosts, 1 port, 1 host, completed ARP ping scan, okay, 3 total hosts, so we know that we definitely have 3 online. Initializing parallel DNS resolution of 3 hosts, and then going through, it's doing a SYN scan, which is by default the scan that Nmap performs. And if you know about the TCP stack, there's a 3-way handshake included in, for all TCP connections. It's, ACK, SYN, SYNACK, right? So we can go into that if that's something that interests you guys. You don't know about it already. That's basic networking 101. We can go through different protocols and things like that if you want. It's completely up to you. So just let me know in the forums, and we'll work on that. Okay, so scanning 3 hosts. So then you can see it goes down, and it does the host at random. It scans random ports on random hosts, right? So it's kind of hard to follow this way. It says discovered open port 53. TCP is a protocol on 192.168.1.9. Okay, so going down to the end here, there's port 445 on 1.7, so on and so forth. So it's going to try to guess what operating systems are on these at the very end here. Okay, so it'll also tell you MAC addresses too. Of course, if you want to match that up with your NBT scan results, you could do that as well. Okay, so it's going to say OS scan results may be unreliable because we could not find at least one open and one closed port. Now, that's the important thing. Nmap, in order to do an accurate host discovery OS detection, needs one closed and one open port. Okay, so it's saying here that one system is running Microsoft Windows 7 Vista or 2008. And then, of course, we had a user ask us a question about this whole CPE result thing. That's just part of what Nmap spits out. So, but you can always see here where it just says running. Okay. Okay. So then, scrolling down here, you can see that it's doing a bunch of different things. I mean, if you really wanted to take the time and read all this, you can. It's going through how it did the OS discovery on this one particular host. Okay, so 1.7 was that host. So Nmap scan report for 192.168.1.8. We're going to go through and it's going to say, okay, well, it's got port 139 open, that's NetBIOS SSN, and it's got port 445 open, and it's TCP, and that's the Microsoft DS, and it says Microsoft XP, right, or Windows XP. All right, gives you the MAC address too, so again, you can verify that with the NBT scan results. And then it's going to tell you the OS scan result down below. So it's going to say running Microsoft Windows 2000 or XP. So if you look down further here on the OS CPE, you can see that at some point it says here Microsoft Windows XP Service Pack 3. So again, going through all here, you can read this is Windows XP, okay, and the computer name is XP Pro 1, NetBIOS name is XP Pro 01, and domain name. So hey, no, we now know it's a part of a domain, right? So it's part of Active Directory. So the SMB security mode, it looks like we used a guest account for all this information gathering. Guest account should never be enabled, guys. We should all know that, right? So now we're looking at the IP address 192.168.1.8. Okay, it looks like it's got port 53 open, and it has port 80 open, or I'm sorry, 1.9, my mistake. It's got port 53 open, which we know is domain DNS, and it says Microsoft DNS. It's also got port 80 open. Hey, that's pretty interesting, right? Port 80 is always bad to have open. Okay, so it's HTTP service, as we know, and it's running Microsoft IIS HTTPD version 6.0. That's bad, that's outdated, right? So it also gives you the HTTP methods. You got options, trace, get, head, copy, so on and so forth. Now that might be of interest to you if you're trying to do some sort of injection into, the websites or something like that. Moving forward, you can see the other open ports it has here is 88, Kerberos, Windows 2003 Kerberos, okay. So then it's got, your NetBIOS ports open here, 135, 139. Hey, look, it's got an LDAP port open too for that Active Directory stuff, right? So it says port 445, Microsoft DS, Microsoft Windows 2003 or 2008. Like I said, most of the back-end stuff in Active Directory is about the same. Okay, so it looks like port 464 is open for K password 5. That's pretty interesting. You might want to take note of that for later. So going forward here, we're not going to go through all these open ports. It says Microsoft Windows XP or 2003. Okay, well, let's read down a little bit further here. And it says OS details XP Service Pack 2 or Service Pack 3 or Windows Server 2003. Since they pretty much use the same kind of underlying technology in the kernel, it's kind of hard to guess, right? So let's go take a look at some more information. Well, it says the names, Acme Inc. PDC. Okay, so we could probably surmise there that that's a primary domain controller. But let's take a look at the SMB OS discovery, right? It's Windows Server 2003. Windows Server 2003 version 5.2. Now, in this, it doesn't tell us how much percentage it's sure of that. If you were to pipe this out to the XML file and then convert that to an HTML file, you'd see that it will guess 100%, 100%, 100%, 95%, so on and so forth. Okay, so all right, so we know that all that information is true. Now, here's the thing. If you want to use Nmap to import the results from Nmap into things like Armitage. You would probably want to pipe this out, the results out, to its own separate file, right? An XML file, for instance. So let's just give a brief rundown of how that actually works. Using the same nmap command, okay, instead of piping it out to results.txt, we're actually going to do a little different thing here. There's a couple of flags included in the nmap where you can actually pipe it out to an XML file, right? So that command, or that flag, is tac lowercase o capital X and then the name of the file, but it has to end in .xml. So we're just going to do nmap.xml, right? The other thing too is if you don't want to sit here and look at a blank screen, you kind of want to see something to entertain you as the scan's going along, you could do the update stats command, but again, this is not something we're going to do here. Okay, so let's go ahead and just hit enter. Okay. So it's going to scroll past the screen here. Of course, again, it's giving you the information on the screen here. But if you didn't want to sit here and watch hundreds of things scroll by, you just want to see an update every 10 seconds to make sure it's still working, there would be that it's tac stats tac update, or every stats, or tac stats tac every, and then space 10 seconds or something like that. If you want an example, take a look at the other video that we did, the teaser trailer, Hacking for Fun and Profit, and you can see me do the command in there. I can't remember off the top of my head, and guys, you probably won't remember all these commands off the top of your head either, so maybe keep a little notepad by your desk, or a text file on your desktop or something like that. I don't, just because I know when I need it, I actually just look at the help file or the man pages, and I will figure it out. So anyway, let's just give it here another few minutes for it to complete. And then I'm going to show you how to convert this XML file into the HTML output file, and then use the built-in Apache server to actually view it. Okay, so now it's done, right? So you can see that we have the nmap.xml file here if we ls on the directory, right? So it'll list all the files, and we still have our results.txt. Okay, so that's good. So you may want to do this both ways. It's really up to you guys. Sometimes people are more understanding of visual stuff, and that's the case for me on some things too. So I don't blame you if you want to do it this way. So to convert the XML file into a HTML file, there's a program built in, like I said. It's XSL tproc. Okay, so you can always just type in XSL and hit the tab key for autocomplete. So the way to use this is your input file, which is nmap.xml. Okay, and then you got to do tac lowercase o for output, and where do you want to output it? Well, Apache web directory, or the web service directory, is in /var/www, right? So I want to just output this to there. I don't want to have to keep moving this thing around, so on and so forth. I want to save myself a little bit of time, right? So it's /var/www, and then we have to give it a name. So this one we're just going to name nmap.html, and it's important, you have to put the .html at the end. Okay, so that completed. So in this case, I already have Apache started, but if you wanted to, let me just shut it down first, and then I'll show you. Okay, so if you want to start Apache, it's basically service, Apache, you use autocomplete, of course, like I always do, Apache 2, and then start, right? So it'll say the server started. It's listening on your local host. Okay, so just fire up a web browser. Okay, so we're going to go to 127.0.0.1, and then our file, which is nmap.html. Oops. Okay. So now you can see we got a pretty graphical interface here to look at what we scanned and what we did. So of course, scan summary, these are all clickable links if you want to just go to a certain IP address, so on and so forth. And the reason why I want to show you this is it's, just gives you a graphical interface to look at the results instead of digging through a text file like we just did. But as time wears on, I'm sure you're going to want to save time, right? Because in any industry, time is money, especially labor-related stuff like we're doing. So, you may just want to get used to reading it through a text file, okay? But again, if you want to import into other applications, you should write it to its own separate text file, okay? So anyway, looking at this, just to give you a brief overview, it's going to tell you the IP address up here, and it's going to tell you what ports are open down here, and of course it puts it in a nice table format to give you something to look at that's nice. And then of course when you look at remote operating system detection, it's going to say used port 135 TCP open, and that's how it's going to guess. Microsoft Windows 7 Professional 100%. Well, we actually know it's Ultimate, but it's still Windows 7 Professional. And then it's going to say Microsoft Windows Vista Service Pack 0, Service Pack 1, Windows Server 2008. It's going to say 100%. Now, sometimes, guys, these guesses can be wrong, so keep that in mind, right? Because it's just using basic identification, right? So, again, this shows all this interesting information that we've seen inside the text file. So, if you want to read through this, you could if you wanted to do this for further analysis. But we know what we're up against now. We read the text file. We had it all included. We're going to stick with that. Okay, so let me just get out of here. Okay, let's clear out this screen. So the next thing we're going to want to do is where I actually want to check these hosts for any vulnerabilities. So we're going to use OpenVAS 6 to do that. And I'm sure you've seen the video, the OpenVAS 6 installation and configuration demo that we did. We did a demo scan in there. So I also wrote that script for you guys, OpenVAS startup, as you can see here on my desktop. And of course, you can download that from our website, learnnetsec.com, if you haven't already. Okay. And you can look at our demo video on the script as well. Just make sure there's no nasty bad stuff in there that's going to hurt your system. Okay, so anyway, I want to go back to the root directory, and I want to go into the desktop. Okay, and then I just want to go into the OpenVAS setup script, right? Because this is much easier than starting up each individual service, then issuing the update commands. This is why I wrote the script. It automatically does it for you. So in order to do that, just go ahead and fire off the OpenVAS-start.sh script, and if you've been following along, it's always period / OpenVAS-start.sh, right? And it's going to go ahead and check updates. If you're out of date, which you should be updating your stuff every day anyway, even if you're not doing any vulnerability assessments, it's just going to save you time when you're actually live on site or live doing an audit somewhere else. Okay, so it's going to take a few minutes here for it to do its thing, check its updates, make sure it's all updated, all that good stuff, and then it's going to start up the Greenbone Security Assistant web UI for us. And remember, in the other videos, when you set it up initially, you created a username or a password, I should say. The default username is admin, and then you created a password, so you're going to log in. But this script automatically launches the web UI interface for you, so that's good. Okay, guys, so now we're going to log into our web interface here. Okay, so now that we're logged into our web interface, let me just go ahead and get rid of this scan here. Okay, so now that we're logged into our web interface, we want to, and if you saw the other video, if not, please go back and reference that, the OpenVAS setup stuff. So what we need to do first is we need to go ahead and add in a target, right? So to add a target, of course, we always click the little blue box here with the star in it at the top. So we're going to name this something that we can familiarize ourselves with and easily call back to it. So this one we're just going to name Acme Inc. Okay. So now you can import the host from a file if you wanted to, or you can do it manually. Okay, so I'm going to do it manually here. 192.168.1.0, and then we're just going to do 24. Now, in order to save yourself some time, if you wanted to, you can enter these in from a text file if you wanted to. So I'm just going to go ahead and set it off as a scan like that. Comment optional, you can just put internal, audit, or external if it was external. It's just something to reference it to. Port list, you can choose from the options down here. We're just going to do, we don't want to do all ports because that's going to take forever. We just want to do all privileged TCP, and go ahead and hit create target. Now, of course, you can see we have them in here, right? And there's 255 IPs in there. So now we want to go to create a scan management task to actually kick off the scan. And of course, as always, the little blue box with the star in it. And now, of course, we're just going to call this Acme Inc. again. And we're just going to put in first internal scan. And if you wanted to, you can reference a date and time, but it will also automatically write it out for you in the results. So let's go ahead and make sure your scan targets is set on the correct one, Acme Inc., right? And then go ahead and create task. Okay, so you can see here we have a new task. Status says new. We want to probably go up here if we want to keep an eye on it. Just set refresh every 30 seconds and click this little refresh button up here so it actually applies. Now to kick off the scan, just hit the start button up here. And the scan here should say requested, and when it does refresh here in 30 seconds, it should say that it started, and it should give you a progress meter at some point as it's going through. In fact, I'm just going to set this here to 10 seconds just so we can see what's going on. Okay, so it's at 1% now. Now, of course, keep in mind, this is going to scan all the IP addresses in that range, so this is going to take a while for us. Like I said, if you wanted to input those IP addresses manually, just pop them into a text file, the alive host, and then import it into here, and it'll only scan those 3 hosts. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video here, take a few minutes break. When this scan finishes, I'll come back, and then we'll discuss the results. We'll discuss how to export them as a PDF, and then we'll go forward from there. Okay, guys, we're back. So we got our results, but I did make a mistake earlier. There is a simplified way that you can enter in just the IPs that you want to scan inside of OpenVOS Greenbone Security Assistant. And if you notice that when we went up to the targets, when we created our target, you notice that we put in all of the IP addresses in the /24 CIDR. However, you can actually enter in the individual IP addresses. It's something I went ahead and did during the break while we were waiting for scan results to complete. So let's just go through that quickly just to show you. So I just want to add a new target. I'm just going to name this test for now. Okay, so the hosts, when you do manual, you can do, well, much like we did in Nmap or NBT scan, Nmap, you can do individual host range, right? So 192.168.1, and then we want to start off with .7, and then again it's dash, and you don't have to put in a .9, right? So as you can see, it's already in there autocomplete here, but that's the way you would do it. Okay, so you're only scanning those 3 IP addresses that we know that we are definitely after, and we're not scanning all of the IPs that belong in there that are dead and there's no hosts on them. So that's just to save you some time. And then of course with the ports, if you want to just choose the first 1024 ports, it's all IANA assigned TCP ports, right? Okay, so let's forget about that and let's go back to our actual scan and read the results. So now, of course, whenever you want to go to the reports, you click on the date right here, right? So that's going to bring us into another screen here, and that's going to show us our results page. So we want a full report, of course, always, right? We don't want to just do, some reports and whatever. We want the whole thing. And again, in the forums, I'm going to, I think I already did, but if not, if I haven't already, I'm going to write up a quick thing on how to install the PDF functionality so you can export it as PDF. But from your options here for download, you have everything from ARF type file, CPA, HTML. You can download it to a text file if you wanted to, if you want to incorporate this now into our original results.txt that we were working off of. But just to show you, I'm just going to export it as a PDF. Okay, so then we can just open this up with Document Viewer, or we can save the file. So you know what, we might as well just save it. We're going to save it over, we want to save it into where we were working out of, the Acme Inc. folder, right? And we're just going to name this, see how the default report name and all that stuff here. We're just going to name this Acme-Inc. and then -report, right? And you could put the date in here if you really wanted to. If you wanted to put in like July-05-13 for 2013, right? That's today. So just go ahead and click Save. And of course, from here you can actually just open it if you wanted to. That's what I'm going to go ahead and do from our downloads menu here from Iceweasel. Much the same as Firefox, Google Chrome, same thing. Okay, so it's just, my machine's lagging a little bit here. The VM's actually lagging a little bit, so it's going to take just a moment here to open up. Let's just get rid of all this, and here we go. I apologize for the lag. I didn't really allocate too much resources to this file. So we have an index here as well that you can go through if you wanted to, just to easily go down to an IP address, and then you go to your medium and your high priorities and stuff like that. So it's going to take just a moment here to get going. Now, the thing I noticed about OpenVOS and Greenbone Security System, the web UI, it kind of slows things down. It's very resource intensive, so be aware of that. If you have this on a dedicated machine like a laptop or something that you're taking, with you to sites, or a dedicated physical machine that you're using in your, office to do your remote scans, of course, make sure you have as much resources as possible, memory, and all that stuff. Okay, so anyway, looking at the scan report, you can see that this builds a pretty decent report right off the bat. Right, so for your vulnerability assessment, this is kind of like an out-of-the-box report. So you really, up above here, if you wanted to edit the PDF file in like OpenOffice or something, you can put your logo and contact info up here. Anyway, scrolling down, you can see it gives us a good content table, so we don't got to make that. That's really cool, and it's clickable as well when you're looking at the PDF. So you can see that it goes from medium to low generals, stuff like that. You can see that there's another medium in here. And then now you can see that there's high, right, on 1.9, which we know is our primary domain controller, which is also has port 80 open, so it's running a web server of some type. So let's just choose this one and click on it. So now you can go down here, and your client may not be interested in looking at this specifically, especially the higher ups in the company. The IT manager, he may be interested in reading this because it's kind of technical information. And this is what we'll put in our brief overview when we actually build a case file. So basically, it says hi, and then it gives you the CVSS reference to it. And then also, it's, you just read down here, overview. The host is running Microsoft IIS web server with the WebDAV module or WebDAV module, and is prone to remote authentication, bypass vulnerability insight due to the wrong implementation, so on and so forth. You get the idea. And basically, if you scroll down to the next page here, because it continues, it'll give you all of the technical information included in this CVS, and it'll also give you some reference links too. So this is something that you want to include in your report, all the reference links for each CVS. This way you can give it to the IT guy, and he can actually look it over and go to those links and be like, oh, well, hey, here's my fix. But it kind of tells you the workaround, and it just says disable WebDAV or upgrade to Microsoft IIS 7.0. So of course, that's what the guy would basically have to do. So in short, you tell him, look, either disable WebDAV if you don't need it, or upgrade to IIS 7.0. Pretty much it, right? So look down, another one, another high one, Microsoft DS port 445. This host is missing a critical security update according to the Microsoft Bulletin MS09-001. Now it's important because when you're using, and we will get to this in the next video, because this one's running way too long already as it is. When we get into using Metasploit and Armitage, these are going to be important, the MS09-001, because we're going to look for that vulnerability, and then we're going to fire it at the target after we check it and verify it, right? So again, you can read through all this. The host is running, host is missing a critical security update. It continues on the next page. It tells you the affected system, software, and OS. Microsoft Win 2K, XP Service Pack 3 and prior, and Windows Server 2003 Service Pack 2 and prior. Well, our Windows Server 2003 box is just default out of the box, no updates applied, right? And you'll be surprised at systems administrators on how they do not update their server software because they are afraid that an update, and it's known to happen, it's common, but as an update might break the system, and Microsoft is well known for breaking systems with updates. So, basically you can go down, there's another one here, Microsoft Windows SMB Server, multiple vulnerabilities, and it gives you another Microsoft Security Bulletin number, MS10012, and then it gives you, again, CVS score, and then it, of course, once you scroll down here, it tells you what's affected, and it gives you the references, and it tells you the fixes to run Windows Update. So this is important, like I said, to give to the IT guy that's in charge of fixing all this, and make sure they sign a copy and you sign a copy, and you both retain a copy signed by each other, right? So you sign and they sign one copy, you give it to them, and then you photocopy that or whatever, and you keep another copy for yourself, right? So this way, if they try to ever blame something on you, like, hey, you never let us know about this, and hey, we don't know how to fix it, you never gave us any references, that's a lie, because here it is and you signed off on it, right? So just, it's always about covering your own butts, guys. Seriously, that the end game is always to cover your own butt, all right? So You can go down and look at medium reports. It gives it a CVS score of 5.0. And again, it'll just tell you what it's all about, and it'll tell you why and what's involved and what the fixes are and the references and all that good stuff. Okay, so and it basically says for this one, a solution is to filter the incoming traffic to this port. Well, no kidding. If this port was available from outside on the WAN, that's a problem, right? So obviously that's not the case here. This is internal. So notice that when you do internal audits, you're going to get a lot more results. But as long as they're not accessible from the outside world for the most part, you're okay. But it's still an issue that needs to be talked about or addressed on the internal network. Okay, so they'll have to figure out whatever they need to figure out in order to, solve this on the internal network itself, right? Because if we have one compromised host on that LAN, guess what? We're firing exploits against all these machines that are coming up in our summary right here, and we're going to own those boxes and keep owning them, set up pivots and own other boxes, and before you know it, we have the whole network under our thumb, and that's a bad thing for them, right? So that's basically how to read this report, guys. I'm not going to, we're really running out of time here. We're definitely over an hour. I am not going to get into Metasploit in this video. I'm going to create a separate video to import stuff into Armitage. We're going to do it both ways, okay? Because I think it's important to know both ways on how to use Metasploit. We've briefly went over Armitage before, and we have never went over the actual MSF console. Now, before Armitage and other, user interfaces or GUIs came out for Metasploit, it was just command line only. So there's a lot more options in command line, and I want to show you how that works through command line so you know how the underlying stuff is actually working. And then we'll use Armitage because it's a graphical user interface, and a lot of people like that. And hey, I'm not opposed to it either, but it does lack some features, and some features are a little confusing. Whereas when you're using the command line, the MSF console, it's pretty straightforward. And we'll go through it both ways, like I said, so this way you have an understanding of what's going on. And it'll actually, the MSF console underlying understandings will apply to Armitage and some of the options set up in those exploits. So you'll have a good working idea of how to use both. And sometimes you may have to fall back on just using MSF console, right? I've experienced it a couple times where, and it's not Armitage's fault, but I experienced it a couple times where, Armitage wasn't working exactly the way that it needed to, but I was able to accomplish the same task using MSF console, right? And I've been using MSF console for forever, so I'm really familiar with that. I'm going to break it down in simplistic terms and show you guys how to use that too. All right, so basically today we went through enumeration on the network, okay, emulating a internal audit. We went through, the various steps of not only enumerating all the live hosts on the network, but doing a port scan against them, enumerating operating systems and services. Then we went ahead and also did a vulnerability assessment against those live hosts with those open ports. Okay, so we pretty much triple checked everything. One last thing I want to show you before you go is I want to show you how to actually check with Telnet. Okay, and we're going to use the Windows domain controller because it's a HTTP service that's running on it. So that's the easiest one to enumerate. So we're going to show you how to do that. Let me just get out of here and clear this and CD to root. I always like working out of my root directory. Okay, so basically, if you find an open port like, say for instance, port 80, okay, you always want to telnet into it and try to do a banner grab. And this is what we used to do back in the day before port scanners were like so intuitive and so like on point to tell you what's running on that port, right? So we want to make sure that they weren't spoofing services. And it used to be back in the day, like in Apache and things like that, you can actually modify the files and spoof what results are printed out to you. So instead of saying Apache version 1.3, it would say like, none of your damn business, go away. Was one of my favorite ones to use to spoof my Apache servers that I was running. Okay, so taking the IP address 192.168.1.9, which we knew was from our Nmap results and NBT scan results, and the results from OpenVAS, we were able to determine that that's definitely a Windows server running some sort of web server on it, on port 80, right? So you always telnet space the IP address or the domain name in some cases, and then the port. By default, telnet uses port 23, but that port was not open in any of our scans, so we want to telnet to port 80. Now you're going to get a blank screen in some cases here, so you need to type in get space, it doesn't matter what you put in here, right? HTTP space colon blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. You're just trying to get results, okay? So if you actually did the get command correctly, you would see that it would say like Microsoft IIS, version 6.0. The other way to do that too, in some cases, you can open up a web browser and you can browse over to there. So we'll just do 192.168.1.9, and we know port 80 is open, so we'll go over there. And it says, look, oh, future intranet site of Acme Inc. But what happens if sometimes you can enter in a error page and just make something up like error.html? And look, it'll tell you some information, right? So it says, page cannot be found, okay, it's a default, and it says Internet Information Services IIS. So we know it's definitely running an IIS server, right? So that's just one of the ways to actually verify that. But 9 out of 10 times, guys, you can go by what Nmap says because it's usually right. There's also other tricks to get service versions and things like that. Telnet's just one of them. Nmap, of course, going to, like on a web server type deal, going to a bogus page. An FTP server, you would telnet into the FTP server, stuff like that, just to get a banner grab going on. There actually might even be a tool inside Kali Linux to do it. If there's not, maybe I'll even write one, I don't know. But needless to say, guys, the video is definitely overrun by long. I'll have to do a lot of editing, so I'm going to let you guys go, and I will see you in the next video where, again, we are going to discuss using Metasploit and Armitage to exploit systems that are vulnerable according to the results of our scans. Alright, guys, take care. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.